Here.
I know. I know. So, but believe it or not, I'm actually also speaking at Berkeley tonight. So after like later tonight, so it'll be right as I'll have the election probably playing in the back while we sort of do this. So definitely interesting night.
Yeah, definitely.
How is it doing?
I think we've been good. I mean, we just have three more weeks until Thanksgiving, and then we have all of our finals coming up.
That's right.
But as people are flowing in here, I just want to make sure if there's anything that you needed from our end just at the very beginning, or if you have everything planned out.
I think I have everything. Just facilitating any Q&A, and I'll make you, and maybe I can even make Amy or whoever a co-host. So in case people pop in, you could let them in from the waiting room.
Yeah, of course.
Things like that. But yeah, totally. And I think, look, we could totally be informal. You know, I've gotten to get to know you guys, especially Amy and Devin, over the past couple of years, or past year. I've gotten, you know, very close to your prior group, Kathy and Tiger. So definitely, I was on campus last fall. I think Devin, I think you may have recalled that group. So I'm kind of a big fan of the school, the Tiger Investments Group, et cetera. So totally informal. I'm not in a recruiting capacity here. So feel free to ask any questions that you guys want.
Yeah, of course. And just as a brief overview, so we've invited all of our membership for this year, in addition to past members as well. But we've also circulated the invitation to some other student organizations like Business Today. I'm not sure if you're familiar. And then just a few other groups on campus as well. So people could be filtering in and out.
Sounds great. That sounds like a plan. Let me know when you want to get started, and then we could do it. And I'm going to send around, maybe in the meantime, Devin, I'll send around sort of a link for people if they want to register, if they want to get on the list for like the Elevate newsletter and a few things like that, or the recruiting stuff. I will send that around here in the chat, and I'll also share with you other resources as they come up, to the extent that that's useful for people.
Yeah, of course. We can give it
yeah, maybe one more minute. And I was just wondering, for the Q&A portion, would you be comfortable with people using the chat feature so that they can come kind of as they come with questions, you can address them in that order?
Absolutely. I think what I can do is, so the great point, Amy, I think we can use a chat function. You could also raise your hand, or, that function. And then even if you put it in the chat, I'm happy to call on you, and then we can have a discussion around what exactly you're referring to if there's any questions. So feel free. Cool. Yeah, Amy, we can give folks a minute. And for anyone who added me on LinkedIn, I will happy to take any questions offline. I know some people had asked questions before the session if you didn't want to talk about it in the forum. So I shared my LinkedIn here to the extent that people want to have any questions offline.
Great. Well, it's looking around 6:05 right now, so we can go ahead and get started, and then hopefully more people will filter in.
Yeah, no worries. Okay, cool. Hey guys. All right, excellent. Thanks, Devin. Thanks, Amy. Thanks, Will, for organizing this. So just this intro. I'm Kaushik Ravi. I'll give you guys a quick bio about myself. I spent the last over 8 years now in finance on different parts of Wall Street. I started at Goldman in our investment banking group. Spent 3 years there as an associate. So I started post MBA. And there I had the opportunity to lead some of the largest deals in the FIG space, which is where I worked, which was post the last recession. So financial services was like the biggest area of sort of disruption post the last crisis, which was the obviously the financial crisis of the late, 2008, 2009. And so I'll talk to you a little bit about the lessons learned from that we can apply to the current crisis going forward. But for me, those first few years at Goldman were super formative. I got to work on some really awesome, meaningful transactions, but also sort of figure out for myself a little bit more of things that I sort of liked and didn't like. And so use that and then transition to private equity. I ended up joining Goldman's own private equity group. So we have about $100 billion fund within Goldman, which does private equity and some private credit, growth equity, et cetera, investing. There I made principal there for a little bit of time. And then I guess a couple years ago, joined another fund, Varday, as a director to help build out their private equity business. So let me, actually, I have a few slides and I'll share that with you guys here. 1 second. Okay, cool. Share screen, let me know if you guys can't see it. So like today's discussion, I want to make it an open discussion around sort of careers, career success, especially in the areas of finance, investing. And so we'll sort of hit a wider range of topics. One other thing that might be interesting, I shared with you guys a link to the Google spreadsheet. If you guys, if also, again, that spreadsheet is to sort of get on the, if you guys want more info on Elevate, want to get on the newsletter for future events, et cetera, but also helps me understand sort of the composition of the audience, like how many freshmen, sophomores, juniors, et cetera, there are. So kind of encourage you guys to fill that out. So as I discussed sort of my transaction background, 8 years in banking PE, director in private equity. So I'm pretty proud of sort of that career experience, but also happy to talk about like the acceleration in a career. So I made principal by the time I was 27, 28, and then director before I was 30. So, you know, sort of how do you position yourself in your 20s to get the most out of kind of that first phase of your career? Like I mentioned, you know, a good deal amount of transaction experience. I led one of the largest deals ever in the divestiture of G Capital, one of the largest IPOs ever in Synchrony, which was the largest since Facebook. But then we split it off, about a $20 billion deal there. And then another kind of sell side of GE's US businesses. So kind of a ton of deal experience in my early days. And it's usually, it's sort of like, people always ask me like, you know, how do you get on like the good deals? And some of it's a function of kind of the groups you're in, the teams you work with, et cetera. But regardless if it's sort of like a big deal or a small deal, that's less relevant to like what the work that you guys end up doing on these transactions. So we'll hit a little bit on that, on sort of positioning yourself early in your career. Also at GS, I was fortunate to kind of be selected to a lot of leadership roles. I served as chief of staff in our investment banking group and the FIG group. I also led our associate and analyst recruiting committees, as well as summer offer committees and promotion committees. So happy to talk about on the people development side and so on. So I went to Chicago for my MBA pretty early on. I think when I was like 22, 23. So I'm happy to talk a little bit about the MBA experience, although I was probably much younger than a lot of my peers when I did it. And then finally, I founded Elevate last year as sort of what now is the become the largest, I guess, recruiting, networking, and training platform for students and young professionals who are interested in these sorts of careers. As part of that, we're partnered with professionals. So that's the whole sort of idea behind it, where I bring in professionals from the industry and from a lot of these firms to talk about sort of their experience as well as keys to success, as well as partnered with, you know, the premier finance groups like yourself here and across the country, as well as on the MBA side. Couple things I will say. So these kind of on the professional side, on the Elevate side, we've featured professionals now from over 50 firms. So kind of the top firms. As much to learn about the firm, but also to learn about how to be successful in that career path, and also how people, you know, ended up getting into these different careers that others might be interested in, right? I think the big key about access is really important. I think access to professionals, access to sort of, you know, the world of finance and investing is often really hard. So we kind of make that more accessible for people who are interested in it. On the flip side, you know, we're partnered with sort of the largest and most like university groups, finance groups, et cetera, around the country. So I guess I've given workshops at all of these schools, as well as the MBA side. But this is also going to be more relevant as we talk about some of the networking opportunities, et cetera. So that's the other side of Elevate. Devin was part of this already, but we just soft launched the Finect networking platform, which is effectively now the largest finance networking platform, you know, amongst all our schools. So we kind of picked 12 or so schools to beta launch it with, and sort of their premier groups. And the goal is to have people meet people who are similar to them in sort of career options or career paths, maybe go into the same types of firms or same firms, and then similar years. So like, you know, so people can network with other people in the same path as them and learn from their experiences, share kind of best practices or, you know, recruiting tips or job readiness tips, et cetera. So we launched that a couple weeks ago, and the feedback's been fantastic. I think we got like really good feedback from the couple first round. So looking forward to going through that. So if you guys are interested, I will share the link. It's right here in the chat, and then you guys can feel free to sign up. And then a couple more things. We've hosted these things called sessions with the pros. So the last few weeks we've had on people from private equity, from a couple of people from private equity, a partner and an associate at Centerbridge. And then we had last week someone on from Goldman Sachs. We put this on YouTube. So if people want to go look later, you can hear, but last week's session from the one guy at GS was just fantastic. And then finally, sort of on the training side, we've developed sort of a holistic training around all these different careers. So banking, PE, and VC, but the goal is to sort of have it all be taught by professionals in the space. So if you guys are interested, feel free to check them out on that page. All right, so now let us sort of transition a little bit. Let me share in the meantime the Connect link. So anyone's interested here, this cycle just launched this week, so we'll try to get you into the next cycle for next kind of 2 weeks from now. Okay, cool. So let us dive into sort of one of my favorite parts of these types of sessions is sort of going through, and let me look at the spreadsheet and see how many people. So a lot of the folks here are sort of underclassmen. So we'll try to also address some of these questions. The first question I get asked when I do these sorts of workshops is like, you know, how do you find the right career for yourself, right? So I think it's a hard question, and it's a question that you may spend the first 5 years, 10 years, 15, 20, 30 years of your career sort of figuring out, and there's no right answer, right? And I think before we jump into the topic, it's important to understand, like, you will evolve, we will evolve as things that we're into and by experience, right? So when you're in high school, your goal is to get into Princeton. So now that you're at Princeton, now your next goal is to get into that firm. And now they're that firm, now the next goal is sort of get into, business school like Wharton or HBS. And then I do workshops at HBS and Wharton, and I know their next goal is to sort of get into something else. So sort of that evolves over time, and it's a function of your experience. One general piece of advice is sort of living in the moment a little bit and understanding and experiencing those things and making a decision for yourself. That's one advice. Number two is talking and networking and connecting with as many people as you possibly can in these different industries. And frankly, we try to make it easy for you guys with Elevate, right? So the right column is all the professionals and firms that we've featured on the platform. So you guys have a better sense of what it is to like work there. But realistically, right, you could do internships at like 15 different firms, but A, it's really hard to do that. And B, it's like, it takes a long time. So the best way to learn about these careers is to talk to people, learn from other people who've already been down that path. Because not only does it tell you about the career, it also sort of tells you like what you need to do in order to be successful in those careers, right? So I think that's the second big piece of advice. So one is sort of internalize and introspect on why you want to do certain things. And number two is learn from other successful people who've been ahead of you, who can sort of show you the path. So that said, let's sort of dig in a little bit to these different career options. And I'll sort of say this, I think, yeah, so I guess with the Elevate platform now we reach, I think with all these programmings, I think we've reached like anywhere between 5,000 to 10,000 students on a yearly basis. And so I have a sort of large sample set of understanding what career students are interested in going into. So I'll try to give you some of that color as well. Probably the most interesting, or sorry, the most popular career choice that a lot of our students go into is in investment banking. And so this is sort of traditional mergers and acquisition, traditional corporate finance, where the crux of the job is kind of client advisory and execution of transactions. What that means is a firm hires you to provide sort of that strategic advice to the client. And so as a junior person in this space, you could be working on, you work on a series of complex transactions and projects, but the goal is you build sort of a deep financial skill set in this job. So financial modeling, financial analysis, presentation development, business operational analysis a little bit, things like that. You don't do as much like strategy and operations as a junior person in investment banking. And the goal is over time to develop more client over your career, right? As you go from analyst to associate to, vice president to director, sort of the goal is to A, develop better client relationships, and B, develop sort of the execution and strategic skills in order to execute transactions. So that is sort of the crux of investment banking, or summary of investment banking. We'll get into it a little bit more in a second, but if you're even more interested, you can go check out all the sessions we've had from, people in banking from GS, MS, Centerview, JP, and a bunch of places. So that's the first thing. The second career that a lot of I'd say maybe like 50-ish% of my students within Elevate go into banking. Another probably 20 to 25% go into private equity or private investing. So this could be on the private equity side or credit side. So the crux of the job, and I mean like right out of undergrad, the crux of this is sort of investing and thinking of something as an owner, right? So think about it this way. So now in banking, you're an advisor to a client where you kind of provide strategic advice. In a private equity case, you are an investor. So you own that company. You kind of do a lot of diligence to get to a point of owning that company over a course of sort of 3 to 5 years, and then you can kind of go and sell it. So the mindset here is a little bit different. You're not a third-party advisor, but you are a primary owner. So you sort of have to think about it from the sense of, all right, what is a company or idea or part of the market that I want to really invest in, and such that I can own it for X amount of years. So the nature of the job is a little bit different. You as a junior person spend, you deep dive into a handful of companies or ideas or businesses and much deeper. I remember my first couple months in private equity, like the transition was really, really hard because I came from a very broad knowledge base of banking and now sort of had to apply to get much, much deeper into a company or industry. So that was a really hard transition for me to make originally when I kind of switched from banking to PE. Keys here, I'd say finding the right firm or fit for you. Like, try not to get, really influenced by people around you. Say, hey, I need to go to the biggest firm in the world or this middle market firm or whatever it is. I'd say sort of find the firms that are right for you. If you want to obviously learn more, you could either do the training stuff that we have, or you can listen to some of the talks we've had with people from like, Blackstone, Carlyle, Warburg, just as examples here to learn more about private equity. I'll get into that a little bit later too. There's also a part of private investing called credit, which has been very popular recently. That's sort of you invest in the debt of a company rather than the equity of the company. Again, we can get to that later if folks have questions, but that's another area that's kind of falls under this. The third area where a lot of our students at least try to go into over their career, so maybe not right out of undergrad, but call it 3 to 5 years out, is venture capital. So here, you were investing in early stage companies, so different from private equity. You invest in early stage companies, and also you're taking a non-majority ownership, right? In private equity, you're trying to take a majority ownership, so you own it. VC really sort of it requires an understanding of an interest, frankly, in technology and how that impacts the world, as well as sort of an interest in operating and sort of the entrepreneurial side of the world. So it's a very, very popular career choice. But you kind of have to, it's not the right fit for everyone. It's interesting for the VC mastery training, we just got done interviewing 5 or so managing partners from a lot of the funds that we have. And I think the one big takeaway is it's really hard to break into VC. So I think it's a very lucrative career, but it's very hard to break in. So you have to kind of figure out what is your edge in kind of coming in, and we can talk about some of those topics. Then we have public investing. So this is the hedge fund side of the world. I'm sure some of you guys are really interested in that. Again, here it's investing, but it's sort of in public equities, right? So, or related things like public equities. And so you got to find the edge when information's public. So that's sort of the key here. Again, you can guys can go back. We've had on multiple speakers from Citadel, from Bridgewater, KKR, et cetera. So you can go on and see what they do there. And then here again, the key is to find the fund that's right for you. That's the number one thing I hear from our students that go into this. And then finally, maybe about 20% of our students go into kind of consulting, strategy, corporate M&A, things like that. As Elevate, I was featured by McKinsey for one of our things, so you can go back and listen to that conversation. But effectively, right, I started my career out in consulting. It's a little bit more of a strategic and operational role as opposed to a financial advisory or transactional role. That's something you should think about. If folks have specific questions about consulting, we can totally answer that. But yeah, so let me pause there, and I've kind of said a lot of things. If folks have questions that we should hit now, or we could keep going.
And definitely feel free to rely on the chat feature for this, guys, for anyone who just entered. And I actually had a question, Kaushik, if that's all right.
Yes.
I know that you've spoken about a lot of the merits of each of these different industries, and I'm just curious what you would identify as the most frustrating responsibilities or toughest aspects of a job in investment banking.
Great question. I like to put all my speakers when we have them on the Elevate platform who come from banking on the spot and asking this question. And so I love that question, Amy, because I think, it's important to get both sides of the picture, right? So I'll try to be as candid as I can. One other thing I'll say on the recruiting side at Elevate, we also help private equity firms or investment banks recruit for certain positions. So I'll try to be as sort of, I won't kind of give any specific examples, but I'll sort of kind of make a broad statement about this because it's important to know on both sides, right? So I think, look, the banking job as an analyst or even as an associate is really hard. And it's hard for a couple of reasons, right? I think one is it's really for a lot of people, like their first real job, right? So if you kind of put that in context, it's your first real job, notwithstanding your internships or whatever, but I think you're sort of picking a very difficult place to sort of start your career because you're sort of working with very experienced partners and senior people within the firm. within the firm that you go to. Number two, you're working with very sophisticated clients and there's most senior people, right? So everything you do in banking is sort of with the CFO, CEO, board level sort of interaction. So you're also working on sort of the smartest and most demanding people at the client side. So demanding people internally, demanding people externally, and also you're working on the most demanding projects that a client has. So when someone goes and hires, an Evercore or a, Bank of America or Goldman Sachs, they sort of hire you to help them solve problems that potentially they're not able to solve on their own, right? So you're working on things like, hey, this division might be going bankrupt, or we need to sell this off because it's sort of losing money for us. We want to enter this market. Our competitors are going to this market. We want to raise capital when we don't have enough capital, right? So the problems that you're asked to solve are very, very complex. So for that reason, like you're sort of like triple whammy here, sort of in put in these really, really tough spots at the junior level. This kind of the second layer to that is you're still sort of figuring out your bearings as a junior person. Like, you may not have a ton of like technical expertise, right? You're learning the financial modeling skills. You're learning sort of technical expertise in Excel and things like that, but also you're learning how to work with people. So as a result of that, it becomes like really challenging for a lot of people when they start kind of their careers to sort of manage all those things. And I think that would be sort of the second sort of level of challenge. So all that said, I think the biggest frustration of the job can really be like, oh, and the last thing is you're sort of the lowest end of the totem pole, right? So as an analyst or sort of some analyst or potentially as an analyst, all the work sort of filters down to you, right? So whether it's all the process work, all the modeling work or whatever. So it's just a very intense job. And so it's important to kind of go in eyes wide open, right? The positives of the job are you get to do a lot of great deal experience or transaction experience and really build in 2 years what might take you otherwise 4 to 5 years in another job to build because you're working on multiple deals at the same time, et cetera. But also on the negative side, it's very stressful, right? You're kind of balancing a lot of different things, working with really difficult personalities, and then, and then also sort of expected to get everything right and sort of be responsible for everything. So to sort of directly answer your question, I think that the probably the hardest part of the job is sort of managing all that as it relates to people, time, your sort of work levels, as well as your like schedule and the time it takes to get anything done. So I would say the work-life balance and sort of that element is the hardest part of banking. The maybe one thing I'll say is I'd say 70% of the people that or maybe 50+% of the people maybe end up going into banking and realize it's not for them. So I'd say sort of do that diligence up front and figure out if that's something that you think, you'll want to stay medium term, long term, et cetera. And oftentimes a lot of people go into banking because they don't quite know. Like they don't know if they want to go be an entrepreneur. They don't know if they want to go and kind of do, it's just it's the best job, we'll call it, a lot of people think they can get out of undergrad. So I would just challenge you guys to sort of do a lot of diligence, make sure the firm and the places you're going to and the people you like working with, they're doing good stuff, but understand kind of Amy's point that it is a challenging job. Not all of the job aspects are going to be interesting and fun. Frankly, I think like a lot of it is going to be really, really challenging, like long nights, et cetera. You're given a ton of responsibility, kind of that, and that cuts both ways. And so it's sort of an individual decision at the end of the day, but I'd say probably the work life and the challenges of the job are the hardest part of the job. I think the job is intellectually challenging enough where you do it. The other thing I'd say is some people feel over time, and I might have been in this camp, that the challenges of the job don't evolve. Maybe it depends on your situation. But for me, I think one of the problems is I got to work on so many cool things early on in my career that maybe I felt like the incremental year or two of kind of staying maybe isn't as much of a benefit, right? So that's another thing. Maybe if you see a lot of stuff your first couple of years, you may just feel like another 2 or 3 years of doing this may not yield that same sort of result as my first 2 years of doing it. Kind of that, the incremental marginal difference may not be as much. Again, that's something and then lastly, I think a lot of people leave because they just want to go into something else. And in your 20s, I highly recommend you try to do a couple different things. I think you should take more risks. You should do things that you wouldn't do otherwise. It's the time to do it. And so that's another reason a lot of people do it. So I would kind of maybe those are the factors I'd probably weigh, Amy. Hopefully that was a comprehensive enough answer for your question.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think kind of like last year's session, everyone has a lot of questions that they love to ask you as well. Okay. And I've seen that the chat is kind of pretty active. So
okay. So
yep.
Can people, I'd love it if you guys could ask those questions. So let's start with Joseph Zhu.
Yeah, I'm kind of like very new to all of like the whole finance field, so I'm still not quite sure like what the intricate like details between everything is. One of the things that I'm not quite sure about is like the difference between consulting and investment banking, because like you said, like both of them do like heavily with advising, but like what's like kind of the difference between those two?
Yeah, of course. It's a good question. Some people ask me about the Finec thing, so I'm just going to link it in the chat. This is the cross university networking platform. So that's the link here. You guys can sign up. So Joe, it's a good question. Let me look at the list. You are a freshman. Okay, cool. So you've got enough amount of time to figure this out. So here's kind of how I would break it down. There are some similarities in the sense that they're both client-facing industries, right? So in other words, a client hires you to sort of help them solve a problem. The inherent difference is banking tends to be more tied to a transaction that has multiple parties involved. In other words, let's say, I'll give you my example, like GE, which was back in the day, like a top 10 kind of, stock in the Dow. So they sort of were looking post financial crisis to divest their financial services business. So they had this $500 billion business internally that they wanted to divest. And so they hired Goldman as sort of an advisor to help them do that. And so the task there was, hey, can you guys figure out what is the underlying profitability of all these different divisions? So they're sort of North America business, they're, their finance businesses, their credit card business, so on and so forth. So all their financial services business, they hired us to say, all right, can you guys determine the individual profitability of these businesses and figure out what is a market like if we wanted to sell these businesses, right? So this was a transaction-driven advisory assignment, right? So we basically were deployed, and over time we presented the board, et cetera, but we were basically deployed to sell their largest businesses in the world. So the nature of that was a transaction-driven M&A sell-side transaction. So Goldman was, investment banks are in a good position to do that because what they do is they serve as sort of an intermediary between parties, right? So Goldman as an advisor here would then go reach out to private equity buyers, strategic buyers, whoever's in the industry, to go reach out and see who'd be interested in buying this and run a process. So typically in banking, it revolves around transactions. So like either M&A transactions, equity, you want to go IPO, that requires sort of the company to go IPO, but also requires a bunch of investors to buy into that IPO, right? So that's also transaction driven, right? If you need to divest a part of your business, same thing. It sort of requires multiple parties, debt, all these different transactions. It requires you to do that, right? So that's in banking again at a high level. Right. Consulting tends to be, and this is just sort of a generalization, but tends to be a little bit more internal strategy and operations. So like, let's say Coca-Cola buys you, hires you as McKinsey or Bain or BCG and says, hey, we are really struggling in Asia. Can you guys figure out a way we can like cost cut, or we can sort of implement new growth initiatives, what's working, what's not? There isn't inherently a transaction that's associated with it. Sure, McKinsey could come out and say, hey, you guys maybe should buy Monster, drinks as a way to kind of expand into the drink space or whatever, but it's not exactly transaction driven, nor does McKinsey per se have a lot of relationships that allow them to run a process, right? There's some exceptions to this. For the most part, they're sort of doing a lot more kind of analysis and diligence around business process operations, strategic, sort of what markets to enter, what not, how do you think about this space, et cetera. Again, that is an expertise that firms like Goldman and Morgan Stanley don't have, right? So that's kind of what McKinsey does really, really well. We hire McKinsey as private equity people to advise on, how to think about different industries or how to think about your company. So, we might hire them for something, whereas we hire sort of a Goldman Morgan on the private equity side to help us run a process. So roughly at a high level, that's sort of the industry insider's way to break down consulting versus banking. Like, sure, if you go to a consulting company or a banking company, they'll kind of sell you on the client side, et cetera. But kind of, if you put it in sort of perspective, that's the difference in my mind between kind of consulting and banking. One is more transaction driven and sort of capital and M&A driven. The other one's a little bit more strategic and operations driven and most likely internal based. And that's consulting. Is that helpful, Joseph?
Yeah, that was great. Thank you.
Okay, you got it. Okay, what is next?
I think I have the next question.
Yeah.
Hi, my name's Jason. I'm a freshman at Princeton. First, I wanted to take the time just to thank you a lot for taking the time to do this. I know today is like a crazy day, so thanks for doing it. My question was more sort of abstract in the sense that you provided a lot of great descriptions about each of the different fields in finance. But I was wondering, since you have a lot more extensive experience than I do, working with these people personally, getting to know them, probably going to lunch, if you had to sort of associate 1 to 2 like personality traits, characteristics, skills with the the average person or the most general person that you meet in each of these fields, which one would they be sort of going
All
down
of
the
the
list?
fields? You mean like everything from banking down to venture and
Anything
yeah.
you have time for, but
Okay, yeah,
just
okay,
the
cool.
5 fields.
It's an interesting question. So that's funny. By the way, Jason, good to meet you. I think I've done maybe about, in the last year, 60 or 70 of these types of workshops at different universities. That is the first time. I usually have gotten a lot of, that's the first time I've gotten that question. So kudos. I think that's an interesting question. So I'll try to do sort of my justice to that question. So I think banking, I'll give you sort of off the cuff adjectives. I think very detail oriented, very impatient. I think bankers are very much like process driven. So they kind of want to see kind of X, Y, and Z. They're also very like, they're very commercial, right? You know, they're trying to help kind of figure out one way or the other. So that you know, whether it's, if you say my company's struggling, I think people will try to say, hey, is it a business issue? Is it a capital issue? Is it a strategic issue, et cetera? And then number 5 is client driven. I mean, I think, especially from my experience at Goldman and beyond, I think they're very, very focused on relationship and client building, which I really appreciate. So maybe those are 5 sort of adjectives. I think on the private equity side, I would say private equity investors are neurotic in the sense that we are very like focused on what could go wrong. So, because I think at the end of the day, we want to uncover everything that would avoid us from doing a bad deal, because you don't want to do a bad deal in private equity because you'd rather miss a good deal than do a bad deal. So I think I'd say very neurotic is probably a good word. I think the second word is very just getting things done. I think that's the bottom line in PE. You're managing like 5 or 6 transactions at the 5 or 6 parts of a transaction at the same time, and you still have to sort of get everything done. I think that's really important. And getting them. And then number 3 brings me to efficient. I think the biggest thing in private equity is managing your time and being efficient with your time, processes, people, etc. So I think they're beyond efficient in how we organize our schedules and I know who we meet, etc. Number 4 would be creative. I think private equity tends to get a lot of creative people who we're able to see things, and the good private equity investors are able to see trends and things that they're not even apparent yet, right? So that's sort of one thing I would say, sort of creative. And then maybe number 5 would be people driven. Like, I think it's really important for us to have really strong management teams, and it's ultimately a people business, in that the people running the companies that you invest in sort of becomes the crux of the company doing well or not. When I mean, we buy a company and we let the management team do it, so we need the people to be really strong. I think so. That's on private equity. I think venture capital, I'll just give you a couple. I think venture capital, people tend to be sort of creative in a different way. So they sort of are able to see potential opportunities even before they're born. Like, in other words, there's such an early stage company that you have to kind of see the future, right? You have to say, hey, and it's funny, I had on someone last week, for the training on the VC side, those guys were one of the first investors in Netflix. So I asked him, like, and then I had another one who was an investor in Robinhood. And I was asking him, like, how, like with Netflix in 2000, when it came to you and say, hey, we're going to sell DVDs in the mail, you're going to be like, what are you talking about? Like, Blockbuster has 5,000 video stores. Like, how is someone going to buy a thing in the mail, right? So you have to kind of see like the evolution of the company. I think the second thing is patience. I think VC investors are incredibly patient, where they, you've got to be okay with the entrepreneur kind of, like, look at Netflix, another great example. They started with video in the mail, then soon DVDs came out, and it's just, okay, let's just do DVDs. And DVDs are thinner, so they could go in the mail a lot easier. So that was a great sort of thing than a VHS. And then they decided, hey, let's go online. So I think that was a huge sort of momentum when we were talking about this in the case study. So I think you have to be patient a little bit. So maybe those are a few words. And then public investors, I think you have to be short-term memory. In other words, like, you have to sort of be okay with markets going up and down, and there not being, and this is kind of 1 and 2, but not there being any good reason. Like, you may have a thesis on, like, hey, this company's going to do well, but tomorrow something happens out of your control in the market and the stock market tanks. So it has nothing to do with the fact that your investment idea was bad. It was just like bad timing. So you have to be a little bit sort of resilient and have sort of short-term memory. And then in the consulting side, I think they're very diligent and sort of kind of don't leave any stone unturned. So it's a very, again, detail oriented. And I would say they're very, very strategic. Like they're able to come up with solutions where there aren't any, right? So I would say, especially we go through the challenging problem, like, hey, we don't know why this division's struggling. And then I think the people we work on, the consulting firms, do a tremendous job of kind of being very data driven and figuring out why that's the case. So anyway, so hopefully that's helpful, Jason. I try to just totally off the cuff give you some thoughts / judgments, I think, on these different careers.
Yeah, that was amazing. Thank you so much.
You got it. Oh yeah. I think there are more questions. Sorry. By the way, I just shared someone private messaged me for my LinkedIn. I just shared it. And then one other thing I would highly recommend, if you guys Elevate, we are on Instagram. So I know a lot of people use Instagram. A lot of our students use it. So if there's kind of events that we just try to post up, I have a social media intern who does this. So if you guys want to like do these AMAs with professionals and all this other stuff that you do, or advice, daily advice and stuff, so you can definitely check us out there. So sorry, there were more questions on this. So let's do Jason. I think we had Christopher Selberg.
Yeah. Hey, Kaushik. I'm a freshman at Princeton as well. So if I'm not mistaken, you're currently balancing the operations of your own company and still working in private equity. So am I mistaken?
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. So my question is, how do you balance that time? You talked a lot about like private equity, people having to be time efficient, but what are some of like the specific things you do to be efficient with your time?
So the flip side of sort of efficiency is also like, I think, look, and that's a good question. So I'll sort of answer very directly. Like I've been very fortunate by the time sort of in my late 20s to be at a level where you can really like start leveraging people and really have a say in your career, right? In other words, like getting to a director level before you're 30 allows you a lot of flexibility to kind of do the things that you want to do. So I think for me in starting Elevate, sort of my 20s were very much focused on how do I, and this is, I'm being very honest with you guys, how do I get ahead the furthest I possibly can in a short period of time? I think in my sort of the next 3 to 5 years, I wanted to be equally focused on how do I build a platform that then multiplies and is able to sort of connect and be impactful to thousands, 10,000s, maybe 100,000s of people around the world with their career. So that is sort of one sort of the mission and sort of my mindset behind building Elevate. Obviously, I've been very fortunate to have it grow as far as Stats has had in less than a year, because I remember, Devin and others can correct me, but I think I was at Princeton around this time last fall. So I think, sort of that's when I was starting Elevate. So in the last 12 months, it's sort of infinitely grown, so which has been amazing. And frankly, like it's about carving out the time to do it. And I'm not spending 100% of my time in either place. So it kind of, or call it 120% of your time in either of the places. So I think one is leveraging people around you and frankly, like taking breaks and taking sabbaticals and doing whatever. There's a level of flexibility that getting to a certain level like affords you. And so that's kind of what I would say. And then I think really focusing on things, if something's exciting and interesting to you and you want to really build that out, I think carving out the time to do it. So I've taken months off to sort of build this, as and when needed, right? I think, and sort of investing on the side. So I would kind of say, if you guys are ever interested, passionate in doing something on your own, try to figure out how to balance that with your own career progression. And look, let's say I take the next 2 years off to build Elevate because it's going so well. I'm not like, I've been so fortunate to get so much like career acceleration in a short amount of time that A, it's not going to matter, but B, like any period of time you go to do anything is sort of an investment in that idea or yourself. So don't kind of think of like, oh, I have to do this, then go to business school, then do that. And by the time you focus on anything that you're actually passionate about, you're like 50 years old, right? I think that's not what you want. So I think you want to try to keep finding things that are interesting to you. And look, I think there's been parts of me that have always been entrepreneurial. There's been parts of me that have always been, impact driven, parts of me that wants to build a platform. And so I think this has afforded me the, very honest answer, ability to do that. That could probably supersede investing in private equity, over the medium to long term, right? So I don't know. So I think you have to sort of invest in yourself. It's funny. I had on Mark Cuban on my podcast or on the platform a couple months ago. And I think I always ask him, I was like, look, are students really, and he's on the other end of the spectrum. He says like, everyone should be an entrepreneur in their 20s. And sure, I think there's a certain group of people that I think should do that. I don't think it's for everyone because there's a lot of risk and there's a lot of, potential like risk and downfall with kids or a bit, maybe chances of not being successful or failure. But I think, his point was like, your 20s is the time to try out new things and whatever. So I guess my point is you can go back, I'll link the talk here to people that are interested, but, one of the things I think a lot of entrepreneurs say that is like, you have to find out time to take those risks, even if it's early on, such that, look, the whole goal of your career is to find the things that allow you to be like really the best that you can be at something, really be interested about something. And then number 3, like make an impact on however you define impact and success. So investment banking or private equity isn't going to be it for 75% of you guys. Yet we'll go do it because, you know, that's where you build a lot of the skill set that you need to succeed in whatever that you do. I take an example of my MBA students, and I'm partnered with probably every of the top 10, you know, private equity groups, like, you know, at all these top 10 MBA programs. And I think a lot of the people there are struggling with, hey, I did banking and private equity and everything I was supposed to do in my 20s, yet I'm here not knowing what I want to do in my 30s. So I think you sort of have to keep challenging yourself to figure that out for your own. And so the short answer to your question is, if you find things that are interesting to you and are making an impact and sort of building something bigger than yourself, I sort of would take it and do it. Again, you don't have to do it like as the primary thing. You could try to build it out and see. I guarantee it, you know, all of you guys hopefully will be finding that over the course of your 20s, such that you could really focus in your next part of your career on sort of building that out. Is that helpful, Christopher?
Yeah,
okay.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you got it. I'm trying to be as honest and candid as I can on these questions. Cool. There's more. Juliana.
Yeah, hi.
Hi.
Thanks for being here today. I think my question kind of ties into what you were just talking about, but I'm a sophomore at Princeton. I'm not really sure what specific field I'm interested in yet, and I don't think sophomores have like a, you know, large opportunity to like get firsthand experience at this point. And I think a lot of people on this call like might agree. So I was wondering if you have any advice for how at this point we could like figure out, you know, where our potential could be met and like how can we find like what we're really passionate about.
That's a good question. It's a great question, Juliana. Great to meet you. Thank you for that kind of very honest question. So I would say time is the most important thing in anyone's life. And I think we don't quite realize that. When I look in college, I can't imagine, you know, all the things that I did that didn't amount to anything. And it's totally fine. It's part of self-discovery, all that stuff. I guess what I'm going with this is that, you know, time that you guys have a lot of now in terms of summers, in terms of school year, I would challenge you to devote that into, it doesn't have to be formalized internship at Goldman Sachs or whatever, right? It could just be things that you think are interesting to you that will serve as sort of learning opportunities, right? And so you're absolutely right. I think a lot of my freshmen and sophomores really struggle with getting good opportunities, good looks at a lot of these jobs. I think my counter to that always is like, do something, get some experience, and something that sort of teaches you a little bit more about yourself or about a certain skill. And maybe you even start with things you're involved in school, right? I mean, this is like by the way, Juliana, it's not a question just you as a sophomore at Princeton face. It's a question that all of my students across all 40 universities face, all my MBA space, my young professional space, my older professional space. Like, so we also go through this. So it's a very kind of mature question, but tactically though, you got to start somewhere, right? So kind of go through and start looking at the clubs like this or other things you're involved in and sort of figure out, like, first at a wide array, like what are the things that are interesting to you? What are the things you've spent time either in high school or now sort of interested in? Has it been like, you know, more entrepreneurial things? Has it been things where you can control, like, you know, the marketing side of things? Is it sort of the finance side of things, et cetera? So start developing a little bit of a view around what are the things you've automatically gravitated towards, right? And what is interesting to you. Number two, start thinking a little bit about what are you actually good at, right? So are you really good at logistics? Are you really good at marketing? Are you really good at sales? Are you good at finance? Are you good at something that you think you are uniquely good at? Again, that would change also, but let's just start with wherever you are. And then number three, go and try to track down an industry, an internship, could be a school year internship, could be some sort of work experience that sort of merges those two things. So if you come and tell me, hey, I think I'm really good at marketing, and I want to apply that sort of in the, you know, infrastructure or not-for-profits, whatever the space is, then I'd say, hey, go out and reach out. Don't wait for you to get to your junior year and for internships to be posted on some website and going and applying to it. Go out and reach out. I mean, in the great world that we live in, everyone is just an Instagram or a LinkedIn message away from sort of meeting people, right? And sort of interact with them. I think you should go to them with a unique value prop. Be like, hey, I'm really interested in marketing. I'm really interested in infrastructure. This fund that you guys are working on is fantastic. It's something I'm interested in. And then I would love to learn more / like potentially work with you guys as an internship. So it doesn't force you to be like it doesn't force you to be unnatural and that, hey, okay, I'm going to go go to McKinsey and say, hey, like I want to go work here for X reason. It actually is an area that you're actually interested in, right? So you can go start with that and sort of get an internship there. That'll teach you a lot, guaranteed. 60% of that job, you're going to be like, oh, this sucks. This is like the first desk job I have. It really sucks. Like I have to do all this data analysis, like, you know, all this BS. But hopefully that 40% of the job you sort of like, and you say, hey, I like this industry or I don't. Or even better, you hate that industry. You completely dislike that job. You dislike that fun. Great. You spent 2 months doing something that you could have wasted 2 years on, you know what I mean? Doing out of college. So I think, you know, sort of really challenge yourself to put yourself in positions, again, have a plan and sort of say, let me start with something, anything. Like if you spend the next 2 months sort of reaching out to a handful of companies, 10, 15, challenge yourself to reach out to however many, you're a student at a great school. There's limited downside of rejection. Sure, if they reject you, great. You wouldn't have reached out to them anyway. So who cares? You know, just go out and sort of reach out to people. The second thing I would say that's related to that is relationship building. Like you guys should all, or a lot of you should already sort of start reaching out to the alumni network of these different places. And the next question you're going to ask me, Julian, I already know it, is going to be, how do I reach these people? Like, how do I get in front of these people, you know, and ask them these questions? And I would say, all right, let's start. You have like, you know, a top 2, top 1 alumni network and sort of what you have in Princeton. And so the biggest thing I think my students don't take advantage of is the alumni network. So start with that and sort of, you know, go through, I've seen the Princeton alumni database, you know, students have shared it with me and we've kind of gone through it, sort of go through, identify industry things you're focused in, and then identify people you want to get into. Again, this isn't going to be like, take a very systematic approach if you want, or you could just take a very sporadic approach, but whatever works for you. I think go in and sort of pitch yourself. You know, learn how to pitch yourself. Be like, hey, I'm Juliana. I'm a sophomore here. I've really been interested in, you know, consumer retail. I'm really interested by the direct-to-consumer space. I love, you know, companies like Lululemon and blah, 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 blah. You know, I think, you know, I really think I love what you guys are doing with your fund and investing in consumer space. You know, I'd love to have a conversation and figure out, you know, learn more. Or whatever, pick a space. I just use an example of consumer, but whatever it is, I think go through that and just challenge yourself to do that, get in front of professionals. The hardest thing I've had to do in my career was initially start networking. Like nothing gave me as much sort of heart palpitations as sort of getting on the phone with a professional and not knowing what to say. So I think, you know, at least you'll get experience. So I would just say, look, challenge yourself. And then the more reality of it is like, some of these careers are challenging. Like Devin can attest to this, Amy can attest to this, other people, Kathy, some of these people can attest to this. Like people want experience. So sort of a chicken or the egg question, right? Like, hey, I want to go work at a bank, but I don't have any experiences. Well, my challenge to you is everybody else found a way to get experience. So I'm sure you could find a way to get experience. You know what I mean? So I think just go and try to get an experience somewhere that teaches you something about yourself, hopefully, that then translates it to something better. So life is all about sort of laddering, right? So you sort of, you have a great platform now in Princeton, which you worked so hard in high school to get into. Now let's try to get you to the next level and sort of get you to a host of opportunities. I'm not here to say you need to go into consulting or banking or private equity. I'm here to tell you, go find the thing you are actually really good at and can really make an impact in, and go at it. So start somewhere. I know it's sort of not an easy thing to say, but guarantee you, if you challenge yourself over the next 2 months to reach out to 50 people in any industry, position yourself, guarantee you by spring of 2021, you will have an internship somewhere that you can start working towards, and then translate that to a summer internship, translate that to a full, you know, junior year internship, translate that to a full-time. So it's sort of a ladder process. No one's going to hire you right now to like be a McKinsey summer analyst, but hopefully if that is what you want to do. But I think just building those skill sets up and the experience up to go there. The other thing is these, and I will say the reality of this, these careers are very competitive, right? So everyone's trying to find their unique edge. And so the biggest way to get edge for me is 3 things. One is relationship building, which we talked about. Number 2 is skills building, which you can totally use the Elevate platform. Like 90% of our stuff is completely free. So you guys can go and have at it. Like the types of professionals and the firms that we have is unparalleled. And I think, you know, it's sort of like, nowhere else will you find, you know, all the top 50 firms and people from there. So I encourage you to use it. And then number 3 is experience building. We can help you with that, but you can only do so much. And that sort of lands on you to sort of go find those experiences. So for me, it's relationships, skills, and experience. So the first 2 things we can help you with. The third thing I think we can help you with, but some of that's also heavy lifting from your end. So is that helpful, Juliana?
Yeah, super helpful. Thank you.
You got it. Okay, there was a few more private messages. Let me see. What else do people have? Okay, LinkedIn. Okay, sorry, one sec. And then, okay, what's the next question? Whoever sent me private messages, is it meant to be read out loud or is that supposed to be offline? Maybe I'll try to anonymize it. Let's see. But emphasizing networking for securing referrals or something. Okay, good question. So this question comes around about like networking for internships and interviews. Like, it's a good question.
I can talk if it's easier as well.
Okay, all right, Justin. I didn't want to out you on this thing.
Oh yeah, no, I just wasn't sure. Like, I was just automatically set to private, so that's.
Oh, I see. Okay, go for it. Go for it. Yeah. So ask you a question.
Okay, yeah, sure. So I'm a sophomore at Princeton, majoring operations research and financial engineering. And so I asked this question because I think it's pretty related to what you were just saying. You know, one of the things you just emphasize is relationship building, right? So I think it's very important for all of us to sort of hear. I think that's something that's emphasized a lot in terms of networking, you know, get your name out there. And certainly, you know, I've definitely talked to professionals who have been super helpful with me understanding, you know, what exactly is banking, distinction between different groups, and perhaps why is this something I'd want to do? And they offer really great advice. But I guess my question is why is this so important for relationship building? Sort of how does that necessarily convert to, you know, materializing and perhaps you getting an interview or they giving you referrals? Like, what does that actually look like? And is that an important part of it?
Good question. Let me guys take you behind the scenes, and this is the Instagram thing. So a couple people asked me about that. I just sent it along. So let me take you guys behind the scenes. I'll just give you one example, and this is the example that I'm familiar with. What we did at Goldman, but extrapolate that for other places. And we'll get to banking and we'll get to other stuff. So when I was kind of both on and also leading parts of the recruiting team at GS, this is kind of behind the scenes of how things work, right? So you guys, the short answer to your questions, you don't know. You don't know what networking is going to actually lead to or not lead to, right? So let me start off with that. Number two, the recruiting process is super haphazard. I'm sure all the people that, you know, that are ahead of you, like Amy and Devin can kind of attest to this, Kathy, all those folks, and attest to the fact that like, it's super haphazard. Like there's, for instance, let's take, for any school, when I was at Goldman, we get like, for any analyst position or whatever, associate position, we get like 300, 400 resumes per school. And we only really had 30 spots maybe for internships and maybe 5 spots for actual jobs, right? So as far as like, and kind of multiply that by all the schools or whatever. But my point is like, it's super haphazard. So even if you did everything right on paper, like you were like merit scholar, like 1600 on SAT, like blah, 4.0 GPA, whatever, there's 30, 50, 250 other people. Like I had on someone from Centerview, and his quote was, we get 300 resumes for something, 275 of them are literally the same. And you could replace the name and whatever, right? So this is where sort of networking comes in, is that to the extent that you can get to know people there and establish some sort of a connection, when we are sitting in that interview room or when we go through the resume book, first we ask our analysts to sort of go through, our first and second year analysts to say, hey, go through these 500, 300 resumes. Let's identify sort of the top 100 who we absolutely should interview, or the top 50 we absolutely should interview. And then so they aggregate feedback from people on the recruiting team. So anyone who's on the Columbia recruiting team or the Princeton recruiting team, if there's such at that bank, they say, hey, have I met, Justin? Have I met Devin? Have I met Amy? Like, what was your, what is my impression on that person, right? So that's why, that's sort of the behind the scenes company answer, as you may call it, to why networking is important. So to the extent that you can start meeting people and getting positive either connections or whatever, I think that's going to really help you. Because look, when we're on the recruiting team, if a banker called me and they said, hey, Justin, I talked to Justin from Princeton, really impressive, kind of did this and that. And maybe like Devin has the same resume as you, but I didn't get to talk to him. So I have no idea of knowing that, but I know Justin has a good resume because I talked to him and he kind of explained it to me. And so I'll call they'll call me and say, hey, Justin's great. Let's put him on the team. It has nothing to do with the fact that Devin is a bad candidate. It just has to do with Justin made the effort to make me reach out to me. And so I know him. So guess what? Devoid of any other information to the same resumes, I'm going to give the spot to Justin as far as like the interview goes. So I'm just saying, this is just an example. Don't extrapolate it to being like the end all be all. My point is, the minute someone calls me from internally and say, hey, I like talking with Justin, I probably wouldn't even look at your resume, because I'm like, someone from our team made the effort to talk to someone here and was positively impressed. I don't care about the resume anymore because they've already sort of come in. And so that's sort of more practical reason to why this matters. Again, you could go through and talk to 50 people at a bank and then not still get an interview because maybe one of those 50 people you talked to, you rubbed the wrong way. And then they like said, hey, I don't like this person, whatever. And those negative interactions carry a much more of a weight than the positive interactions do, just kind of behind the scenes. But all else being equal, you guys going out there and putting yourself there is how it actually helps you in networking and stuff. And also, frankly, like it gives you guys a good understanding of different firms and groups, right? So you say, hey, I'm really interested in healthcare. in Credit Suisse or JP Morgan or Goldman Sachs. Go talk to them and see, are they working on things that they really like? You know, not all groups are created the same, not all cultures are created the same, not, you know, not everything's created the same. So some of it's also reverse diligence. If this is the type of place you want to work with, work in. And so, but I think for more of a inbound way, that's why networking really helps, to sort of differentiate people that are maybe otherwise undifferentiated in a crude way, not in a mean way, but like sort of in sort of a crude way. And so I think that's one of the biggest areas of networking. And yeah, I think to your question on whether you should ask them, yeah, I mean, look, people, you do what works for you, right? So if you feel really unnatural, I mean, look, I always say if the conversation is going well, be like, yeah, I would love to meet, let's say you're interested in healthcare, you're talking to a healthcare banker, say, hey, I'd love to meet an analyst on your team who's also interested, who's also doing healthcare so that I could get to know the field. And if you had a good interaction, they'll probably make that connection, right? So I think it's helpful to know more people on margin than not. And I think, you know, that's always helpful. But also understand sort of what are you bringing to the table. That one of the biggest things, and Vince from Goldman on Saturday when we had this discussion said this, and I completely agree with him on this, people don't do as good a job of sort of selling us on you guys. Like a lot of people are super modest and say, hey, yeah, I've done this and that, but kind of use that platform and be like, hey, I've done X, Y, and Z. I think I'm a good candidate because of X, Y, and Z reason. Again, don't go at it too hard, but sort of come from a position of strength and say, hey, look, I'm really interested in this industry. I'm really interested in this. This is all the great things I've done. I'd love to meet more people here because I know I'd love to get to know more people here. So I think just be proactive and doing that. And the last thing about networking, I get asked this a lot. Hey, I sent an email, no one's responding. Guess what? Like, so is everyone else. And like, I think we all have had, you know, 70% of our emails go unresponded. So a couple things on that, just follow up. It's okay to follow up. Oftentimes there's bankers who only respond to follow-ups, like they don't respond to the first emails. And then second is like, find creative ways to get in front of people and also cast a wide net. Like, yeah, your hit rate's going to be less than 50%, but hopefully you're reaching out to enough people that you can sort of connect with, you know, all else kind of being equal. So is that helpful, Justin?
Yeah, that's great. Thanks a lot, Kaushik. I really appreciate the context.
Of course. Okay, maybe we'll take one or two more questions. And here's the link to the Finec thing for those that asked and maybe who haven't signed up yet. What else? Let me see if I missed any questions here. Let me spend just 1 minute on a couple slides that are really helpful for other places. We won't go overview of investment banking. We won't go groups. We won't do case studies. Maybe I'll do, so this is networking advice, resume. Let's do it later, this stuff later. So let me just maybe spend a minute on this. What are, and I'll say bankers, but I also have a slide later on private equity, but let me just do banking since it seems like a lot of people are underclassmen here. I think the 5 things I'm looking for are people that say they're looking for in banking, I would say are analytical ability. So this is a combination of your initial outreach, your resume, your informationals, and your actual interview. So that's all the data points that we like to gather, right, for any candidate. One is analytical ability. I think we want to see you guys have some sort of an experience. Again, this is kind of prior experience, and this is to Juliana's question earlier about how do you get that experience, but some sort of analytical experience that has you sort of solving complex problems. Again, it doesn't have to be you were at a quant hedge fund or something. You could just be like, hey, I was sort of a part of this startup that we had a big growth problem and we tried to address it and we did X, Y, and Z to solve this problem, right? So I think that really important to show some sort of working with problem solving ability, call it. Number 2, leadership skills. We love, I think I speak like when I was at Goldman, but also all the private equity stuff. We love people who show demonstrated leadership, whether it's in school groups, whether it's in anything that is actually impactful about it. It doesn't have to be a finance group. It doesn't have to be Tiger Investments. It doesn't have to be whatever, but pick something where you've shown that you're going to be a leader and actually take something from point A to point B and make an impact. Again, this is going to be important where you guys go to business school. It's going to be important when you guys go to other jobs, right? So I think just finding ways to excel in things that you're uniquely interested in. Number 3, drive initiative. Again, we really want to get to know what are the things that drive these people? Like I'll remember, I think I must have done over 1,000 interviews in banking and private equity. And I think I don't necessarily spend, I spend maybe 5 to 10% of the interview on technicals because I think technicals are just sort of a checkbox. I spent the majority of the interview talking to people and understanding sort of what's really motivates them and what does that like spark in them that I could see them as being part of our team, right? So here we want to know, like, are you a really good tennis player? Like, why did you like playing tennis? Are you a really good piano player? Why did you like doing that? You know, whatever the case is, sort of what are the drive initiative things you're doing that actually make you really good at something? Because that is what will translate into these jobs. And then finally, or the fourth is interest in finance. I think we want to see some base level line of interest in finance. And that could differentiate a lot of people, especially as recruiting happens earlier and earlier, like just being like, hey, I follow the markets, right? I know what's going on. I know this industry. I kind of understand these companies, because as recruiting gets earlier and earlier, it's harder to prove that you're really genuinely interested or this is a job for you. One of the great ways to do that is if I ask you, hey, what deals are you following that you think is interesting? Having 3 or 4 things to say and say, hey, I thought, Dunkin' Donuts just went private. I think that's really interesting for blah, 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 for blah, blah, blah reason. Or Ant Financial's IPO, I think that's interesting here. And Quibi shutting down is interesting because of this. So whatever the things are, talking about these things and understanding companies. And finally, I think it's important to manage people, communications, et cetera, because in banking and even private equity, you're gonna be managing like 10, 15, 20 different things at any point in time. So it's really important to sort of manage all those things. So let me, I will sort of say that, okay, so that was that. I think, so I will say, are there any other burning questions? I think I got a private question saying, should you follow up after getting waitlisted or don't hear back from Super Day? Absolutely. Yes, my answer is yes, because it depends who you follow up with. My recommendation would be following up someone who you've had some sort of relationship with. Maybe not the recruiter, because the recruiter is going to give you the same canned answer they've given all the other 20 people on the wait list. Hey, well, we're still making a decision. We'll come back to you, right? They're not allowed to say anything else. I think you should reach out to people you've gone to know through the process, or someone you know there, maybe an alumni, and say, hey, I really, this is the top choice for me. Evercore or Perella is my top choice. I would love to either sort of get some feedback or know where I'm in this process or anything else I can do to sort of help my candidacy. I'm happy to do that. I think I would position it that way, and sort of reach out to someone at the firm, as opposed to sort of the recruiter or whatever. And frankly, like you should don't kind of mark something off until you've gotten a no, right? Even if you're still on the wait list, like reach out to some senior people and say, hey, like you're a Princeton alum. I interviewed here. I was on the wait list. I'd love to sort of talk to you and sort of explain to me why I really want to work at this firm. Like go on the offensive. Like don't wait for people to come and tell you and to reject you. Like if you're on the wait list, guess what? The glass half full, you're not rejected yet. You still have a shot. So try to make the most of that shot, like unless you're told no. And, you've got like, that game that you play at the carnival where you kind of like put that chipmunk thing and keeps coming up. Like, I want you guys to have that mentality where you sort of just don't go away until you sort of be successful in your careers. I want persistence. I want, diligence. I want sort of, just brush it off. Like it's okay. Like it's one job, in the world. Like it's not the most important job, it's the job you'll probably have for 2 years and then do something else, so I think just don't be afraid. Don't be, like fearful, like don't be afraid of rejection. In fact, be the opposite. Go email a bunch of MDs from Princeton, this week and see what the response rate you get. I guarantee you it'll be better than 0%, which means it would have been better than had you not emailed them at all, right? So I think it just go for it, right? And I mean, be thoughtful and be professional. Obviously, don't be like harassing, but I think just take a chance and see what happens, right? So that's sort of my view on things. Okay, so we're 3 minutes past. I'm sure you guys want to really check CNN or Fox News or whatever you guys consume. So I think I will maybe wrap it up there. I think for the people who asked, I'll share with you 3 things. So if you haven't signed up on the Google Sheets, feel free to. It's totally like it's your resource to use or not. So I leave it to you. And then this is a LinkedIn and Instagram. Again, these are your resources for you to use or not. And then the Finec thing, I think I highly recommend you guys. I mean, Devin, if you want to share a minute on your experience on it, but I think we've been really amazed by the feedback.
Yeah, I was just going to toss in a note anyways, actually, but I had my first call, I think a week ago. It was a really cool experience. Talked with essentially one of the officers of the student investment fund at Georgetown, who was also a senior. He was going into Goldman Sachs in their industrials group. And we just had a really good conversation about, like what we wanted to do in life, because I think a lot of people that are going into investment banking, like we've been speaking about for the past, 30, 45 minutes, it's tough to try to figure out what you want to do at such a young age. And we just had a really good conversation of like where we are currently, what we're going to do after graduation, whether we want to do like further recruiting. And really just great experience. Cool guy, got his number, and we're definitely trying to stay in touch as we're going through.
Yeah, thanks. I think like the goal is to, if you guys are freshmen, we'll try to match you up with other freshmen or sophomores or whatever, where you guys can kind of have other people in your camp as you go through this journey. Because I know for myself, I went to non-target. I graduated when I was the last financial crisis. I lost my only like finance job that I had coming out of the crisis. you know, all sorts. I was first an immigrant. I moved to this country when I was 10. So all these things where I didn't have a network, like I didn't have any family in finance, et cetera. So the whole goal with Elevate is like, can we bridge that gap a little bit on both on the accessibility side, but also on sort of the connectivity side? Because guess what? You guys are all going to be, you know, going to business school in 5 years together, part of the same class. And, you know, sort of, I think of the Elevate program as sort of the feeder into these top firms or top schools. And so again, you know, obviously, sign up for anything you are interested in. This is not it's sort of an open option for people, but I think at least you could check it out and also give us feedback. I think that's another thing. One of our interns actually is at Princeton, so we're happy to be represented from there. But yeah, so really good to meet everyone. Thanks, Devin, Amy, Will, and team for organizing this. I hope you guys found it interesting and helpful. And yeah, look forward to being back on campus at some point and doing this live.
Definitely. Thank you so much for your time, Kaushik. I'm sure that everybody learned a lot. This was, you know, really perfect way to tie together a lot of what we've been learning over the past couple of weeks.
Amazing. I appreciate that, guys. And yeah, best of luck. And I'll send you some follow-up stuff to the people that are interested. All right. Cheers.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much.
Bye, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kaushik.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You got it. Thank you.